Hello, my friend. I'm so happy to have you for this Enneagram and Marriage deeper dive episode we're doing today on our midweek mini. And I want to invite you, if you're not already a subscriber here, to make sure you hit that button to subscribe on YouTube or Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening, because I want to talk with you about auditioning in your relationship today, auditioning for love to be specific, and when to reach out and when to let go. Because so many of you have the experience where you send a vulnerable text or message or ask for a date night from your spouse, a hug, get nothing back, and you feel like you're the only one initiating, planning, or keeping that spark alive. And honestly, I love talking about the three desires or instincts, as you know, self-pres, sexual, and social. And that's really in the heart of the sexual instinct. And so sometimes people say, stop auditioning when I see the different hooks on Instagram. And I'm really thinking this is a good episode because the truth is you can't stop auditioning for love, or you will stop surprising. You will stop having anything but routine, and you need to keep it fresh. But you also need the routines that come with our self-pres instinct. So today we're going to talk about this middle space. You already know, I hope, that you need those routines in place of just chores and life and bills and who's going to do what car pickups, etc. But you need the sexual instinct, the spark, that joie de vivre, whatever is keeping your relationship alive. But you have to know how to deal with it when you feel like you're the only one. And of course, some of you are even thinking, well, I'm not really self-preservation wired for those routines. I'm not really sexually wired. I'm more socially wired. And that's a totally different topic. And you can continue to check out episodes here for that one. But we're in that heart space today. And some of you live there all the time. Some of you are like that. I definitely get it. If you are, I have that self-pres instinct pretty close to my sexual instinct personally. So I will be in the corner with a book and trying to do my fitness as well as pursuing Wes sometimes. And then other times he is the one who's like, let's pursue each other socially. Let's do a fun mystery dinner game. Let's do this or that. So he will mix those two instincts, sexual and social, and I'll mix more of the self-pres sexual. But somebody in your relationship has to put in that sexual energy, or you're going to have trouble and you're going to just have a roommate situation. So I want to make sure you know that this is super important. And we're going to talk all about that today in our midweek mini. But before we dive in, just a quick reminder that registration is open for the Ennea Summit for Midlife and Beyond. It is in the show notes. There's a free edition. There is a paid edition that is actually already ready for you. I love that. That is so cool that it's early. Now, for those of you who want the extra hours, 40 plus hours, deep dive material for you to see many different speakers, including Russ Hudson, talk about the Enneagram. And I'm so excited. We're going to have him on our show too in the coming months. But the truth is, you are getting rich information from people who are like, I have been there, done that. I can help you, whatever your temperament, if you're in those middle years. And then also, I want to tell you about something really special this weekend that's happening. And that is also in the show notes that I mentioned briefly Monday. My friend and fellow Enneagram enthusiast, Rachel Kessler, and her husband, Tim, were extras in an inspiring movie about their friend John O'Leary called Soul on Fire. You might have already heard about it, seen previews, but this is a true story about John, who at age 9 was burned on 100% of his body, and the heroes in his St. Louis community who helped him into his miraculous recovery. So I'm so thankful to get to watch this. This is including Cardinals baseball Hall of Fame legend Jack Buck. John O'Leary went on to become a worldwide best-selling author and inspirational speaker. And this inspiring movie is about resilience and the power of hope, love, and the human spirit. And it's good for the whole family. So I really look forward to seeing this movie this weekend and encourage all of you to do the same. And you can find out more information at soulonfiremovie.com. And thank you for hearing these fun announcements. I'm glad we have something to do because we know that when we get into these busy habits again and we're like into our routines, we can forget beautiful ways to connect. And what was so fun about that movie is my husband Wes was just like, oh my gosh, there's this really good movie called Soul on Fire that's out. I'm like, oh my gosh, Wes, you know that that's Rachel and Tim's movie. And I'm so thankful and happy. We're going to definitely take our family to go see it this weekend. And I want to connect with you now on our other topic, which is, as we know, getting that deeper sexual instinct just in terms of connecting in that middle space, not the routine, not the social. So again, you send a message to somebody you care about. Maybe it's vulnerable. Maybe it's a Voxer message to a good friend. Maybe you're trying to connect. Maybe it's a little joke or thinking of you. And then you get nothing back or silence. Or worse, you see that they read it, opened it, and they're clearly still there, but not responding. And sometimes it makes a little spiral. Something I'll do, actually, this is so vulnerable to share, but with my friend Stacy, is I will leave her a long message on Voxer. And I'm like, I've been too vulnerable. I'm taking it back. And she's like, no, don't take it back. And I'm like, it was just like a personal process. But whenever it's important, she's helped me in her two space to be able to say, okay, I'm not going to take it back. I'm leaving it out there. And it's so healthy and good. I love having good friends who can help you to say, keep it there. I want to hear it. But also, her and I both are like, actually, if I did leave you too long of a message that was just kind of for me, that's okay too. So you have to have the both and, right? Or like, here's my note to my spouse. I just want to vent. And sometimes it is that. So please be clarified with your partner. Like, I'm just sharing. Today, I'm just sharing. I don't need any response. This is just an FYI. And that way they know I'm not really looking for anything from you. Whereas other times you may be like, I need a hug. I need a response. I need a reaction. Please don't leave me on red or whatever else you want to use for your terminology, depending on your communication set. But let's just say that you do ask for that touch, that connection, that love in some capacity, and you're being vulnerable. And all of a sudden, they don't give anything back. And maybe moments go by, or minutes, or hours, days, and suddenly you're spiraling. Just, was it too much? Too weird? Are they judging me? What should I do with this vulnerability hangover? And I want to help you to process what you can do about that without shutting down or becoming someone you're not. Because how many Enneagram 8s, I'm sure you're feeling this with me too, but have we all heard from who say, I just feel like you're asking me to be smaller. And I just can't do that, frankly. And I don't want you to become smaller. And this is not all 8s I'm talking to, but I do want you to know some of us are natural initiators or auditioners in relationship. We're working to create connection, maintain warmth, generate newness, and spark. I couldn't say I'm always that person because, again, I will get lost in my self pres. And sometimes when I've had enough social or connecting, I really do just want my peace and quiet. But I will pop back up after rest and come out and do that again. And some of you are like, girl, I don't need that much rest. I'm the one. So I feel you if you're like me, a both and, or if you're the one who's a little more active. And then some of you are like, I have almost no energy. So I am the one who usually gets all of the load. And then I don't know what to do to give it back. So I'm going to give some tips for both of us, like all of us, and within those three possible scenarios. So the ones initiating, asking the questions, bringing the energy, planning the dates, this often comes from a combination of maybe being anxious attacher, or the sexual or one-to-one instinct, like And if you were anxiously attached, you learned early on that relationships feel safer when you work hard to maintain them and even have a bit of control around them. And you were sensitized to any sign of distance, disconnection, and your nervous system says, I need to fix this. I need to reconnect. I need to make sure we're okay. And maybe if you're anything like me, you had somebody kind of doing that. I had been kind of spoiled by my mom, who is very two-ish, who would almost do that for me. Like, oh, I notice you're dysregulated, Christa. Let me come pursue you. So I got really used to somebody else doing this for me. And in that way, I can be avoidantly attached sometimes. And maybe you have that experience too, where it's a bit of a both and again. Add to that the one-to-one or sexual instinct on top of that, that instinct that craves intensity, specialness. This is you and me against the world. And then you've got, if you have all of that together, like the anxious and the sexual, you've got tremendous energy going into creating and maintaining deep connection. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. Again, I don't want anyone today to feel like, oh, you're wrong or bad. And when it's reciprocated, this energy is beautiful and it creates aliveness, depth, intimacy. For me, I can't maintain it all the time. Like, I've already done a podcast interview today and the person's like, I love your energy. And I was like, I literally took a 12-minute nap afterwards. Because it can become exhausting. And by the way, that person did match my energy. I just didn't have that much. So when the other person isn't meeting you there in the relationship time and again, that can be exhausting because you're the only one putting out energy. And maybe they even have told you clearly, hey, I tend to be a bit more withdrawing. I kind of am used to people pursuing. Yeah, send me that or tell me that or be vulnerable. I want that information about you or share it anytime. But when you do say it, and you're vulnerable, playful, connective, whatever it is, you get maybe crickets, like, or a flat response. And you're like, okay. And suddenly you're like, okay, this doesn't feel like I auditioned for the relationship. It feels like I didn't get the part, or, you're not auditioning for me. I'm the only one trying things on. I feel a bit of a jester. I feel a bit performative, and I feel like this needs to be more mutual. And so I want to just say, I think that in addition to the people who are sexually wired and anxiously attached, I think that there's a few types that can do this a little more. And one of those is two, because twos are wired to connect through giving, through anticipating needs, through creating warmth. So when someone doesn't reciprocate, it's like, wait, what happened? Am I not needed or valuable? So you reach more, you give more, you even often tell, hey, I love this. Thank you for doing that. But what can happen is still the person on the other side just doesn't have that energy to give back or doesn't prioritize it. And that can hurt. Also, fours, if they're more of a sexual four and they crave that deep, special, you see me and a lot of time connection, when someone doesn't pull back toward you or doesn't match your intensity, it can feel like a rejection of your whole self, like I'm too much or they don't get me. And then I mentioned the 7-8 energy of bringing enthusiasm or energy to the relationship and being the one to plan things. And when someone doesn't engage with your ideas or they seem flat in response, you can start even performing more. But honestly, every type can fall into this pattern in different ways if they have anxious attachment. Plus, we often have those wings and arrows where somebody may say, well, I'm a 9, but I wing 8. And so when I'm in my 8 wing, that's what I do. And that can be so painful. And I actually have had that experience with 9 wing 8s where they've said that to me. And sometimes we feel like there's a few types also who tend to be on the other side of it generally. So I'm going to speak to those as well and know that 6s could also be in that first group as well, just being a bit of a push toward. And then 3s can go either way if they're in their work, where they're like, okay, I am a really like focused in my work, but if they're not, they're usually toward the partner. Now, 5s, 9s, 1s, generally you're going to see, again, not thinking of them in their arrow movements, just as types, that they're generally the ones to be a little more of needing the space. So they would be the ones that you might feel toward, I don't know if this person is connecting. I don't know if they're responding to the ways I'm putting myself out there. And for 5s, it's because they need a lot of internal time and space. And it might just be them retreating, responding, processing, recharging, working on something that you don't even know behind the scenes and then giving up on it. And maybe they just have a slower timeline. And for 9s, they're so easygoing sometimes that they don't even feel urgent about initiating or responding. I was so touched in my relationship with a 9 this week when I was talking with her, and she was so sweet. And I said, we don't always connect right away. And she said, you know what, though, if you need me, I would be there for you that day. And I was like, oh my gosh. And if you're listening, my friend, I would be the same for you. But it was, I think it was hard for me to say that back. But of course, she knew I meant it. I hope so. It was that moment where I was already vulnerable and she was vulnerable back. And then 1s, sometimes you're so focused on tasks and doing things right that the social niceties, the emotional checks, all that stuff falls off the list. It's like you care, but you're prioritizing elsewhere. So I want you to know it's not just anxious versus avoidant attachment. It's also just about typology, personalities. And hello, that's what the whole pod is about. So that we remember, why do I go on all these podcasts and say Enneagram is helpful to your relationship? Because it's often really helpful to remember we're just different and we care differently and we have different instinctual needs. So again, you're going to have these instincts show up, the sexual, the self-pres, the social, and this painful discrepancy means that, it's like you're thinking something's missing, but your partner's thinking this is exactly fine. I love this. And so please remember, first and foremost, whatever your type, it's not rejection, it's just different wiring. And I know you've heard me say this before, that my husband, Wes, doesn't typically initiate date nights. And for a long time, this hurt. It felt like he didn't value the relationship enough to prioritize that. But what I've learned is he's genuinely satisfied socially and sexually in our everyday life. He doesn't need a formal date to connect with me. His instinctual stack means he gets filled up through our regular life in ways that already meet his needs. And for me, with more self-pressed sexual, the date night is the thing. It's how I create intensity, specialness. It's essential, not optional. And it doesn't mean I have to have one every week, but some sort of connection point, or I will literally have a blind spot about us and be like, okay, we're just roommates feeling for me. Because I think I do get a little more performative socially. Like we're right now leading a C.S. Lewis study at our church, and like I'm really attuning to the needs of the group. And I'm not feeling like me and Wes. I love like building him up because I feel like I just did the Enneagram and marriage group with him at church, and it was more of something I was passionate about. And now we're doing something that he's super passionate about and that I like, but not as passionate. And so I'm able to say, like, ooh, like let's point to Wes about this. He has a master's in theology and he has a science degree, and this is a great thing. And it's more about that versus us two connecting, if that makes sense. But the discrepancy doesn't mean Wes doesn't care or that I care more or that I don't care about him socially. It just means it's what feels like maintenance to one of us is like the main event to the other. And it's so important that you don't tell yourself a narrative that's like, they don't care about me. If they loved me, they would do it my way. The question instead, though, does become how do we meet each other in that discrepancy? So I'm going to give you some practical tips. And first, I'm going to just name do your own work. One of the biggest things that you can do, and you maybe heard on Monday's pod this week, was yes, it was helpful for that couple we talked to, the whole of us. I love them so much, but just yes, they got to do some marital work, but really they did their own work. I don't know if you caught that, but they were checking in with each other, but they were just learning like, what am I like when I'm in my victim mode? And what am I like when I'm in my hero mode? And that was their work they were each individually doing. So that's a very big key for you for starters. Now, the other thing is notice that vulnerability hangover that you experience, but don't shame yourself for it. Just notice, I feel exposed and embarrassed, and just say to yourself, oh, there's that vulnerability hangover again. And don't pile it on with, I shouldn't have said that, unless it's one of those times where you're like, actually, that was just me verbally processing. It's okay if that was it. But if you're like, I'm stupid, I'm not good, I can't ever let anyone see my authenticity, that is not healthy. And just remind yourself and your nervous system, I am not going to let you tell me that I've been rejected. I'm just going to allow myself to say, that's my style of sharing. That's where I was today. And maybe there's something I can learn from it too. And we'll get into that in a moment. The second thing I want you to really remember outside of taking care of you with your self-care and just naming it and not shaming it is match their energy, not their words. If somebody says, yes, I want you to tell me things, and then consistently doesn't respond or gives a flat affect or is on their phone while you're talking to them, believe the behavior, not the words. And they might genuinely think they want more communication, but their actions tell you what you're really getting, right? So if you're like, yeah, my spouse keeps telling me they want more time, and then I'm like, they're not paying any attention, they're just in their phone, that's important that you shorten what you're saying, change the topic, find topics they're interested in, and most of all, talk to them about that behavior. Say, hey, something I've learned about is John Gottman turning towards behaviors. I've noticed that you're on the phone a lot more when I'm talking to you. Can you let me know if perhaps there's a reason for that would be helpful for me to know? And they may just right there go, oh, I'm so sorry. Actually, I'm getting caught up in that whole dance of busyness and just the phone and dopamine addiction. I'm going to work on that. Or they might get a little defensive and say that only happened one time. And in that case, you just might want to draw back and say, okay, I'm not going to at all criticize you about it, but just take your own notes on that. Like, what can I learn to match their energy and not their words? Because of course, what I don't want you to do is just talk to somebody who's literally on their phone. Okay, now the pause practice is the next thing I want you to know. And that is before you try to go in again with new information and a new tactic, give it a pause. And it could be 24 hours where you're like, okay, really, we've just been busy. I'm not going to try to do a turning towards behavior again where I bring up something important. You can also, if it's a negative thing, of course, remember we're supposed to be 4 to 5 positive, according to John Gottman, the #1 marriage researcher. So you can come in with that, like, I'm going to be way more positive, even if it's about a conflict, or I'm going to give us some fun times before I come back to a conflict. But remember, your nervous system wants to fix things right away. So sometimes you're like, I don't want to wait, but waiting is just the thing to do. And in the meantime, take care of yourself. Take some time to read a good book, watch a good movie, go for a long walk, listen to great music, give yourself a chance to turn into, like I've been sharing on my blog, The Outsiders musical or Taylor Swift's new album. Get analytical with something, like I said, that you're reading or learning. But in other words, manage your anxiety and don't make everything about that sexual instinct and connection. And schedule something with a friend who's also interested in that. Like you heard me say, I keep a lot of two besties. So that way we can connect anytime, generally speaking, unless one of us is working if we need. So pause, breathe, let it sit. You can reassess the next day. Now, if you have a really strong one-to-one sexual energy, make sure, and I'm just like, as if I had a highlighter with a pencil, I want to say, direct some of that energy towards something else, not just at your partner. And so it could be a creative project you work on, a friendship that's reciprocal. If it was somebody like me, I could see, oh, I'm going to put that into making a podcast episode or a new tool, a hobby that lights you up. This is not about replacing the relationship, but it is about not putting all your eggs in the one basket and overwhelming others. So you don't have to become smaller, but you disperse your energy a little more. Okay, just a couple more tips, guys. This episode is becoming a little longer than a midweek mini, but I think it's rich for us to cover. So I'm happy to have taken these notes. So the next one is self-soothing scripts. So when you're spiraling, try something to the effect of, this distance isn't about my worth. I don't need to understand why to know how it feels. Maybe even I can be warm but still have boundaries. Maybe connection should be mutual, not performed. And when I should here, I don't mean like my partner's bad and I'm good. I mean just allowing myself to know that it's not about my worth, right? In that moment, like when I overtext my friend, I'm like, oh, this isn't about my worth. This is about, I just needed a verbal process. And if I was the other person on that end of the phone, I might rather hear a bit of a shortened summary. So I'm going to re-record it for 2 minutes versus 10. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about versus it has to be like, you're bad and you're wrong. Now, most of the time I don't do that. I just leave it out there and my friend and I will leave each other 10 or 15-minute messages. Or when I can't take it back, instead, I might just pause and wait a day before connecting again. But the point is, if you decide to try one of those practices, there are several phrases you could try, and those are a few, but you have your own unique ones as well. And people always wonder, Christa, why doesn't it feel good when I give a phrase to myself, but then it doesn't change anything? And that's probably because you need to come from a few angles. So maybe you asked your spouse for a date and they said, I don't have time this weekend. And then you said, okay, that makes me feel rejected and that makes me feel sad. And you acknowledge it, which is really important. But then you allow yourself to say, well, they are busy this weekend. They have this entire weekend locked and loaded, but they love me. And here are some other ways they've shown me they love me this week. And that is so important that you do that. Like I had this experience actually recently when I had to say to myself, Wes didn't do this. And it was just, I caught his mood. I caught his type 1 mood. And I was like, oh, he seems like he's in a mood. And I think it was because he had to go back to work. But I told myself, Christa, this is not about you. This is about having to go back to work. And he just spent like 2 hours making you a video for your birthday where he was like, you didn't ask him for that. He was just literally sitting there making a video of you for 2 hours. And, as a 7, I can be like, oh, that's great. Thank you so much. That's so cool. And then be like moving on instead of really embracing. So hear me when I say it's important for you to look and to see what your spouse is doing for you versus just looking for a self-soothing script that says like, oh, they don't love me enough. Okay, now notice your actual need, not just the solution. This is really important because sometimes we all have a tendency, I need this, therefore it has to be done like this. But instead, open up possibilities. You might say, I would really love to have hamburgers today. And then you and your spouse talk about it. Are you going to find a recipe for really good hamburgers? Are you going to go to the restaurant? Are you going to have DoorDash? Are you going to put them on the list for this week? And that's a really silly example, but it's important that you recognize just because you have a desire, one of these 3 desires, and in this case, the sexual desire for connection, does not mean you have the whole be all end all on the solution. So be open to your spouse and how they want to share that with you. And here's a bonus tip specifically for the person with lower needs or more avoidant tendencies. Show some enthusiasm when your partner initiates, just because you should know that goes a long way. They may not feel like you need to match it exactly. You may certainly not even be able to, but just meet their bids for connection with as much warmth as you have. So I think those are a really good spots for you to consider. And here's what I want you to take away from this episode. If you're that person with the vulnerability hangover, you're not too much. You don't even need to stop being warm, vulnerable, or connective, because those are gifts you're sharing. And I would hate for the world to miss out on that. But you also don't need to audition for people who aren't showing up. You need your boundaries, your backbone, and you don't need to perform for connection, because real relationship is mutual and it's got a back and forth rhythm. So wait, so pause, so look more openly. But at the end of the day, it does need to feel like a dance, not a solo performance, or I do want you to pull back. And if you're consistently the one initiating, reaching out, creating warmth, that's data. And it's not about your worth, but it's about what this person you're with has to connect with right now. And you get to decide if that's enough for you. And if it isn't, speak up, because one of the worst things we can do for our relationship is have worked so hard with all these tips to get nothing back and then to not do anything. So trust your experience. If it feels cold, your partner's probably being cold if you've gone through all these things and there's still nothing, regardless of what they say. And if it feels one-sided at that point, it probably is. So remember, you get to do something about that at that moment. That's a good moment to say, we need a check-in. We absolutely do. When is a good time for you? And give them some times and get some therapy or coaching if they won't do any of that work. So definitely auditioning can be healthy, but when it's one-sided, stop auditioning and start noticing who shows up for you. And remember, these are your people. And hopefully that's going to be you and your spouse, and increasingly so that you guys can be this beautiful team who not only connects well, but launches well into the world with your mutual gifts. So thank you so much for listening to this midweek mini-ish, not even necessarily mini anymore. It was definitely a fun one to record, and I love your ideas and suggestions for more. So don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast wherever you're at. And then also make sure that you check out the show notes for the Ennea Summit for Midlife and Beyond, as well as go see the movie Soul on Fire. Look forward to talking to you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you again for listening with us. It was so wonderful to have you. I love knowing we're doing this journey together, not perfectly, but with love, grace, and hopefully some fun too. If you loved today's episode, make sure you leave us a 5-star review at Apple Podcast or Spotify so others can find it too. Visit our show notes so you can get all the links from today's show, as well as enneagramandmarriage.com, the Instagram, the Facebook, and all over the place. Make sure you spread the word. Love living intentionally with you. Bye-bye.